Liberty. We'd like to welcome Justice Paul Newby. He's speaking with us tonight. And Representative Jimmy Dixon. And also Bob Jackson, Chairman of the Republican Party. Are there any other elected officials? Mother Sloan is from Faith Baptist Church. Stand, please. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Joe Hass Sr. is going to open in prayer.
Sorry, pray. Father, we thank you today for the privilege we have to be a part of your family. We thank you, Lord, for our country. We thank you for our forefathers who grew up with the Constitution. And Lord, I pray that you'll help us to continue to protect that and all the liberties and freedom that you've given. Lord, we thank you through these many, many years that we've had the privilege of worshiping you and serving you. We pray tonight that you will give us again that desire to stand for the things that are right and allow us to be good citizens and to work hard. Lord, I pray that you bless this meeting tonight. As those who speak, may we be attentive. May, Lord, we learn things that will help us to be better citizens. Lord, thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Let's stand and pledge allegiance to the flag and sing Star Spangled Banner. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red flare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that Star Spangled Banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
We'd like to thank all the workers who have made this possible. So many people did so much work. We'd like to thank Victory Church for allowing us to use this beautiful facility. And I have one note of housekeeping here. They asked if we not bring any food or drink into the sanctuary. And just as last year, we want the good reputation of leaving everything exactly like we found it when we are finished. That's why they will welcome us back this year. So let's keep this place beautiful for them. Citizens for Constitutional Liberties is committed to attracting, educating, organizing, and mobilizing the citizens to a secure policy consistent with the U.S. Constitution. And since the Constitution was written on biblical principles, we interpret it by the original intent. We're not anti-government, we are for limited government. We are not protesters, we are promoters of the Constitution. We're not people bashers, we are for First Amendment rights. We are Christians, but we are tired. We're tired of seeing our Constitution trampled on. And we are intent on getting the public educated about what's going on in our country. At this time, Bob Jackson is very for us.
She just said the same words as last night, so I'll do that. We are citizens for constitutional liberties, and it's our goal, as she said, to educate the people in their area about the Constitution. am convinced that that document came about through the hand of God, that He influenced those individuals that had part in that creation, and that certainly it will stand forever. Could I just announce that Chris and Paul, who is with us from Florida, has been invited, I think, to do a 1-hour radio show down in her area. But she needs the apparatus that would allow her to do that off-site, the equipment. And she has books for sale out in the foyer and CDs and so forth. And if you would like to help her achieve her goal of being on the radio on a regular basis to teach people about the Constitution, then you can either make a donation in the basket at the back, or you can buy some of her books or CDs.
Mr. Jackson,
I'm sorry, go
it
ahead.
is actually a nationally syndicated radio show.
Oh, it is?
So we will be all over the country.
Outstanding. So you can either buy items to help her do that, or you can just make a contribution. Either would be appreciated. We need money to accomplish our goals in Wayne County in this area as far as the Citizens for Constitutional Liberties. We do have members of our group, and we do have a membership fee, and that is $12 a year, and it's due in September. Someone called the other day and said, I can't remember whether I've paid or not. I said, that's all right, just go ahead and pay. We don't care how many times you pay, but if you want to pay once, it's $12 a year. And we appreciate that. This is the kind of things that we like to do to discuss the Constitution and to get everybody in our area aware of its benefits. We are losing our liberties one at a time, sometimes two at a time, but we are losing them, and we need to do what we can to stop that. Appreciate your help. All of those that you have contributed, thank you. And those who haven't, please consider. Thank you.
We have Annabelle Gravett with Americans for Prosperity with us tonight. She would like to tell us about the Daily Dreams Summit.
Hello, everyone. Seems I'm slightly taller than the people before me. Who here have been on any trip with Americans for Prosperity? That's right. You're excited, aren't you? Yeah. Okay, everybody else, this is your chance. The Defending the American Dream Summit is our best trip ever. We're going to D.C. on the 3rd and the 4th, and there's a bus that's going to be here, and that's going through Goldsboro, and we're going to leave early on Friday the 3rd of August, and then we're going to get there in time for a rally at the Capitol, and then after that, excuse me, it's my pleasure to announce that Governor Walker will be our keynote speaker on Friday's dinner, and then on Saturday there's going to be a couple speakers, including but not limited to Representative Paul Ryan and Tim Phillips, our president, and Michelle Malkin. And then there are going to be a couple breakout sessions, and then we go home on Saturday. So this trip is amazing. Everyone who goes loves it. And I personally am looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fantastic. And we want everyone to go, as many people as possible. So there are many, many scholarships available. If it's too much for you to go, then please find me, see me. My business card is on the table with the flyer of information. And then the back of it has specific North Carolina information that you need to make this trip possible. So thanks so much for being here, and please, please, please consider going on this trip. It's going to be fantastic. Thank you.
Just a reminder, this is an opportunity for anybody for a $5 donation information, you can receive a card. We'll have the drawing tomorrow. You must purchase your tickets by 12 o'clock to be eligible for it. Also, like I was telling you yesterday, there is an alternative prize if you win and would choose it. Would be a $100 gift certificate from Once Upon a Child. So either way, it's a good deal. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink in the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have the consolation with us. The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is only dearness that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price on its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. I don't think that needs any explanation. I suspect most of you know what that is. That was written by Thomas Paine, December 23rd, 1776. It is at least as appropriate now as it was then. Thank you all for being here. Now it's my honor, my pleasure to introduce a man who was born in Ashburn, North Carolina. He received his BA degree in public policy, graduated magna cum laude from Duke University, and a law degree from USC Chapel Hill. Since beginning his service in the Supreme Court in 2004, he's been an instructor for the NC Judicial College and various continuing legal education courses. He's an adjunct professor of law at Campbell University. He is also co-author of the NC State Constitution, the History and Commentary. He received James Iredale Award and Honorary Doctor of Laws from Southern Wesleyan University. He has served on various committees of the NC Bar and served as Vice President from 2008 to 2009. The NC Bar Association honored him with several prestigious awards. He is an Eagle Scout and serves as a Scout Master Emeritus. Troop 11 was born in, I'm probably going to slaughter this, Okanichi Council. He is recipient of the Heroism Award for rescuing 9 people from a riptide, of the God and Service Award, and of the Silver Bear Award. 2010, he was named Scouter of the Year. He is married to Macon Tucker Newby since 2003, and they have 4 children. He and his family attend Christ Baptist Church in Raleigh, where he is an elder, a Sunday school teacher, and a youth leader. Scooby Dooby, please join me in giving Justice Newby a very warm welcome. Thank you.
If my wife were here, she would only correct one thing. We were actually married in 1983 instead of 2003. She should get a little more credit for putting up with a little longer than that. So honored to have all of you here. Certainly Representative Jimmy Dixon, and I saw Senator Lewis Pate is also here. You folks are so well represented in Raleigh. As I go around the state, I get a lot of folks that are cynical. I was talking to this one young lady about 10 days ago, and she was saying, well, she doesn't vote. She's not registered, and she's a public employee. I said, why? And she said, well, they're just all a bunch of, you all are just all a bunch of hypocrites, and, you know, it just doesn't do any good. I just have given up on a public employee. And when those cynical ideas emerge, I think of people like Lewis Pate, Jimmy Dixon, people who, quite frankly, are cut right out of the mold of the Thomas Jeffersons and the George Washingtons, and people who want to be home, tended to business, but have that sense, that pull to serve their communities, because they realize too long, folks like us have stayed on the sidelines, and we've allowed people who have this idea. We don't need to tell you about it. We'll just do it for you. Trust us. And we've trusted it, and we've been burned. It's also great to see Professor Poirier here. I think he certainly has put himself into the public arena and held himself out for office. And I think Liberty University saw that they wanted his skills being a professor. So, Professor, we're glad to have you. Hope I do all right tonight. This morning, I was over at community college boards. They allowed me or asked me to come over and administer the oath of office, and I'm always honored to get to do that. And I explained to them that 1776 North Carolina Constitution and one of the very first implementing statutes passed by General Assembly were about oaths. Now, I didn't go into quite the detail we'll go into with y'all. Why do we take an oath? What's the purpose of it? Why do we have folks put the left hand on the Bible, raise their right hand, or they've got a problem with putting their hand on the Bible, have them raise their right hand? Well, in 1777, so keeping in mind we became a state, of course, on July 4th, but we didn't get around to getting our Constitution in place till December. Cynically, I asked myself, I wonder if we were waiting on Virginia, Maryland, and some of these other states to go ahead and get their constitutions in place, and we could kind of pick and choose the good parts and the bad parts. And then it reminded me of the UNC football team and kind of the way they used to do. They apparently have done things about copying other people's paper, and I thought, well, maybe we do have a tradition of maybe copying papers a little bit. Certainly most of what, a lot of what went in our state constitution came from George Mason. He was kind of the father of protecting fundamental rights and fundamental freedoms. But anyway, this is what our statute says about oaths. Okay, it's required for public service. It's the gateway. If you want to exercise the power, governmental power, you must first take an oath. Why? Lawful oaths for discovery of truth, establishing right, are necessary and highly conducive to the important ends of good government, and being most solemn appeals to Almighty God as the omniscient witness of truth, and the just and omnipotent avenger of falsehoods. All right? That's pretty good theology, as well as a nice warning to folks about why we take an oath. He goes on to say that, of course, you place your hand on the Bible, but if you decide not to do that, just raise your right hand. According to General Statutes 11-3, when you do that, that's in token of your solemn appeal to the Supreme God, that if you should swerve from the truth, that God would draw down the vengeance of heaven upon your head. And that, as an example of what a person should say, we didn't say this today, but it's just an example, and the lady brought a big Bible in. So, anyway, it says, I do appeal to God as the witness of the truth and the avenger of falsehoods, as I shall answer to the same at the great day of judgment, when the secrets of all hearts shall be known. It's pretty good theology, pretty good government. Now, is this a religious statement or a political statement? Religious? Political? Both? Could it be that our religious views shape our political views?
Absolutely.
And that they are the foundational principles of who we are? Well, that's what our founders thought. You know? And quite frankly, we as Christians have bought into the idea of separation of church and state to the point that we want to say, oh my goodness, if I mention God, it's got to be a religious statement, but if I don't, then it can be a political statement, and we've got to... We don't separate that way. I mean, if you are a Christian with a Christian worldview, this is the way your political and theological views are. And that's the way they were for our founders. Even Thomas Jefferson said, Christianity is the best friend of government, because Christianity is the only religion that changes the heart. That's Thomas Jefferson. You know, how deceived we have been. And the question is, are our eyes beginning to open? I'm reminded of the story of a fellow going down the road one day. He saw a sign that said, liberal puppies for sale. And about a week later, he went down the same road and said, conservative puppies for sale. Well, he couldn't figure this out, pulled into the driveway. Sir, you know, last week it said liberal puppies, this week is conservative puppies. What's going on? He's got, the man owning the puppy said, well, this week they have their eyes open. You know, maybe our eyes are open. Now, what we're principally going to talk about tonight, and I'm going to take a few rabbit trails, but what we're going to talk about, 2 decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court. One about health care, the other about Arizona and the protection of the borders. All right? But the principles that decided those cases, the principles of the national debate today, although I'll make a caveat because I think the president goes far beyond anything that we have seen in our recent history in terms of socialism. But generally speaking, all the debate has to do with the 3rd word of the U.S. Constitution. We, the people, or should it have been we, the states? Is it we, the people, or is it we, the states? Well, North Carolina in 1788 said, federal government, you got this thing wrong. It should have been we, the states. We are so worried about what you've done with this Constitution that we will be the only state. We didn't say that. We didn't know it at the time, but there had been enough states to already ratify and form a federal government, but not us. We held a constitutional convention over in Hillsborough, July 21st, 1788. We voted not us. We're not going to join those votes. Why? Because there was no protection of fundamental rights and fundamental freedoms. There was not a Bill of Rights. So we need to talk about that a little bit and the heritage that we share as North Carolinians. Now, you know, I would imagine that there's a few folks out here who maybe were not born here. That's all right. We'll let you consider being part of us as the North Carolinians because we have a heritage here. And now that you live here, now that you are a part of us, I want you to know about that heritage and kind of how it shapes who we are as a people. North Carolina, when we put ourselves into or formed a government in 1776, the very first thing we did was we enacted a Declaration of Rights. Again, this was kind of the brainchild of George Mason, but we enacted a Declaration of Rights. 25 fundamental rights, fundamental freedoms that the government could not encroach upon. The idea was our rights are here, governmental power is here. Governmental power is there to protect our rights and to help us protect our rights. They are not there to take advantage of us. One of the fundamental rights, certainly, freedom to gather, freedom to speak, all these things. This is one, that all men have a natural and unalienable right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences. Certainly, that idea is under attack today as the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit said that government is to censor the name Jesus Christ out of prayer. We should be shocked. That should bring tears to our eyes, and it should cause our blood to rise and us to go, wait, what do you mean? The government is to censor prayer? And why are you picking on Christians? What in the world have Christians done to make us lose our fundamental right that we have to worship God according to the dictates of our own consciences? In 1776, North Carolina put in place 25 fundamental rights, and then they went home. Came back the next day and structured the government, symbolically showing fundamental rights are absolutely essential, and the government is only there to support those rights. But our history goes back even further than that. Anybody have any idea where the roots of the Tea Party began? And they probably began back in England somewhere. But in North Carolina, it was 1760. There's a group called the Regulators. Now, the Regulators have not gotten very favorable press, because who writes history? The people that win. Well, the regulators lost their little battle. But let me tell you about the regulators, because I believe we are the heirs of the regulators. Now, believe it or not, sitting here in Goldsboro, you folks are in the midst of the power of the state of North Carolina. 1760, the western frontier would have been Salisbury. You know, maybe Charlotte. I mean, down in Charlotte, it's kind of sketchy down there. But that was the extent of the state. And boy, if you went beyond that, you really were on your own. And so what was happening is you had the very large landowners who got their grants from England. Okay, they were part of the British Empire. Again, 1760 is what we're talking. So we're talking 16 years before the Revolutionary War. And think about the system that we had was much like Robin Hood. Okay, now think about it. Okay, who's the bad guy in Robin Hood? Well, it was Prince John who became King John, but it was also the Sheriff of Nottingham, right? Sheriffs had a lot of power. And so in western North Carolina, and by western I mean probably certainly from Hillsborough west, there were a lot of folks who were squatters. They didn't have any political clout. No king had given them a grant. All they wanted was freedom. All they wanted was liberty. So they go and they build their cabin and they raise their gardens and do whatever they can to make a living. Well, the sheriff comes over there and he knows most of these folks can't read and write. So he goes in and he assesses the taxes. Just kind of think Zacchaeus, okay? You remember that guy Zacchaeus? You know, he kind of tax collected beyond what he was supposed to. Because 2 months later they come back and the sheriff comes back and he goes, more money, more stuff, more whatever you got to pay the taxes with. And the farmer's going, I just paid you 2 months ago. And the sheriff goes, well, let me pull out my official records here. I don't see that that's recorded here. You just need to pay it. People got tired of it. And they wanted to regulate government power. So they started a movement. They kind of got together, you know, they'd be out there talking. You're not going to believe what happened. That sheriff came by again and doggone, I had to give him, that happened to you too? And so they started figuring out that these folks were extorting, just taking money from them. So they formed a group. They said, you pushed us too far. And there's actually a record of them going into a courthouse in Hillsborough where a judge actually signed an order that said the sheriffs have been taxing folks too much. Oh, and I forgot to say, they go into court, and guess who had the judges in their control? Well, the king's people did. So they weren't getting any justice. You'll recall in the Declaration of Independence, one of the grievances that we had as the people was that anytime we got an honest judge, the king would remove him and put another judge in his place that would do the king's bidding. And so people went to this courthouse and finally got this judge to sign an order that said, in the past, the sheriffs had taken money that was not rightly theirs, and we, the judges, have not rendered justice. From here on, the sheriffs will only take what they're supposed to, and in your courts of justice, justice will be done. All right? Well, ultimately, this governor tried. I'm not sure he'll give me a hard time because we have never crossed the Trent River there in Newbern without me slowing down the car and pointing out over at Trine's Palace, you know. The Governor Trine got a bunch of real Army people, moved in. They had a battle in Alamance County, which would be Burlington, and the regulators' movement was stopped, and several of their leaders were hung. But even though the movement itself kind of lost some steam, all the principles were there in place. And quite frankly, the idea of individual liberty, justice for all, the rule of law, all these things became part of who North Carolina, who we are as a people. So that makes sense that in 1776, we would have a Declaration of Rights, then come back the next day and structure our government. And it makes sense that in 1788, we would be the only state to vote down the federal constitution. Now, I will tell you this, 1789, the Constitution still says we the people, but they proposed, the federal government proposed a Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights certainly talked about fundamental freedoms, but one of the things it did was try to do a little bit of hedging on the we the people. Because listen to the words of the 10th Amendment, all right? 10th Amendment says, and I always like to remind all of us, don't let people tell you what something says, go back to the book itself, all right? I mean, that's like, you remember the Apostle Paul when he talked about how noble the Bereans were because they would hear him preach, and then they'd go back to the Bible and be sure what he, or whatever letters, writings, whatever they had at the time, to be sure that what he told them was consistent with that. And that's what we're to do too. When somebody tells you, well, the Constitution says, whatever. When I finish talking today, go back, go to the Constitution, go to the state Constitution, federal Constitution. This is the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So in other words, the folks wanting North Carolina to become the 12th state of the Union, which we ultimately did, heard the concern of people, not just in North Carolina, but in the other colonies, that it was we, the people, instead of we, the states. And they said, well, we're going to address that in this. Anyway, there were 14 original copies of the Bill of Rights, one for the federal government, one for each of the 11 states, and one for North Carolina and Rhode Island, neither of which had ratified. And just so you'll know, this is, you don't have to take notes on this, you're not going to be tested on it, but in 1865, a Union soldier stole North Carolina's original copy of the Bill of Rights. And in 2003, I did the undercover sting operation and got it back. Just thank National Treasure 3, Nicolas Cage, maybe. But on Tuesday, I will be here at the Goldsboro Rotary Club doing that program about the undercover sting operation that we did to get back North Carolina's original copy of the Bill of Rights. So any of you folks that want to come over to the Rotary meeting, you'll get to hopefully be entertained a little bit for the 30-minute or 20-minute program about the return of North Carolina's original copy of the Bill of Rights. That was extra. You didn't have to pay for that part. So in 1789, North Carolina ratified the Constitution. After we got the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms, we ratified the Constitution, became the 12th state union. Let me tell you just about the structure of our government in 1776. We so distrusted power. One, there was no direct election of the governor, and the governor basically had no power. The governor was appointed by the legislature. The governor could serve no more than 3 years out of a 6-year period. Okay. Legislators served 1-year terms. I'm sorry. But in 1776 up until 1836. Now, my wife's name is Macon. She was named after Nathaniel Macon. Nathaniel Macon, very outspoken anti-federalist person, very individual rights, state rights oriented. He was the Speaker of the House, U.S. House, from 1801 to 1809. Very powerful. He was the original Mr. No. He voted no more times in his votes with, and he's the Speaker, okay? But he voted no more times than any other 10 members put together. He never met a spending bill he liked. He thought the federal government ought not spend money on anything. But anyway, Nathaniel Macon voted against the 1836 Constitution, even though he chaired the convention. And he voted against it because he said it would undermine democracy. And again, sorry for all of us elected officials here, he said if you allow someone to get more than 1 year removed from an election, then it leads to totalitarianism, it leads to tyranny. So he voted against it because the legislators and the recollection of a governor now, but legislators would have 2-year terms instead of 1-year terms. That was his view. My point in making that is that we have a real history in North Carolina of being alarmed about governmental power, believing power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If we fast forward now to the health care decision, I want to put it in a context. With regard to the Arizona law, let me do that one first. Generally speaking, under the federal Constitution, the federal government is in charge of the borders and who can immigrate, this type of thing. And this is the reasoning, and it makes sense. If somebody is getting ready to cross the border into Texas, the requirements, the visa or whatever it might be, should be the same as somebody crossing the border coming down from Canada, or if they're going into Arizona. The laws ought to be uniform, that an individual doesn't have to think, okay, I'm going to this state, so I've got to have this, but I'm going to this other state, so I need to have that. Uniformity in law is generally a good thing. Well, the problem is that we have a president took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution and enforce the laws, but he has decided that the immigration laws should not be enforced. So his executive branch is not doing that, and no one is holding him accountable. That's just one of the laws he's chosen not to enforce. Can you imagine the headlines in the paper if the Supreme Court of North Carolina decided, you know, there's some laws out there we don't like, we're not going to uphold those laws? You know, people would say, how dare you? You can't do that. You took an oath to uphold the laws. Well, Mr. President, you took an oath, I believe. Somehow we're letting this guy get away with fundamental ideas of the responsibilities of his office. So anyway, federal government's not enforcing it. Arizona has a mess because a lot of illegal folks in their office, in their state, draining the limited resources that folks have, whether it's Medicaid or some other things. And so they said, it's sitting right. We're at least going to tell our local law enforcement, our state law enforcement folks, to enforce the federal laws as the federal law is written, even though the federal folks are not doing it. So the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-3, is that right? Yeah, 5-3 opinion, Justice Kagan recused in that one, said that 3 of the 4 provisions violated the rights of the federal government to have uniform enforcement, and that states couldn't do that. Went beyond what states had the right to do. The one provision that was left was that law enforcement, when they made a lawful stop, could also see if the papers or the immigration status was proper. Now, with regard to health care, which was a 5-4 opinion, although she participated in the legislation, Justice Kagan did participate in this one. I think we were all shocked, certainly I was, that I thought Justice Kennedy would be the swing vote. He seemed solidly in the right place. That Chief Justice Roberts would decide the case as he did. Let me tell you some of the issues that were there. Basically, the federal government was exercising extreme power with regard to health care, mandating each of us to buy health care. Right? Now, theoretically, let me put in perspective the theory here. Okay, state government. The state constitution is a limitation on governmental power. And it's because, like I said, we have fundamental rights here, okay? And Representative Dixon, Senator Pate are deemed to be the representatives of all the people, and they have a great latitude, a great deal of power, because they're as direct as we get as a state with regard to our representative democracy, our republic, okay? They are our representatives, and it is deemed that what they do for us, right? And the only limitation that they have on their power is the state constitution. And the state constitution and the individual rights and individual freedoms that are there were deemed to be a limitation on their authority to act. This is not a limitation on the grant of power. Or what this is a limited grant of power. There is no natural power as there is with the states. There's no natural power in the federal government. This is a limited grant of power. So Madison, Hamilton in the Federalist Papers said, we don't need to have a Bill of Rights on this because we're not giving the federal government that much power. If it's not spelled out in here, the federal government can't do it. That's the only power they have. So state constitution is a limitation on the power of government. This document, on the other hand, is a limited grant of power. It's not written in the book. The federal government can't do it. Well, there are two clauses that are at play with the health care decision. One of them is the Commerce Clause, and the other is the Taxation Clause. I'm going to read them to you. Commerce Clause says to regulate commerce, Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. Now, the idea behind it is a good idea. We didn't want South Carolina or Virginia taxing us when our produce and products went from North Carolina to South Carolina or Virginia or Tennessee. We want there to be the free flow of goods among the states. That's a good idea. And so it was the federal government's responsibility to do that. Well, during the Great Depression and President Roosevelt's term, he really intimidated the Supreme Court to the point that the Supreme Court actually upheld the federal government doing this. Old farmer in Kansas decided he wanted to grow some wheat on his property. Well, the federal government told him he couldn't do it. The guy said, now wait a second. This is my property. I'm growing wheat on my property for my individual consumption. Just think the little red hen, right? You know, she's out there planting it and doing all, cultivating it, you know, and then she's harvesting it and then she's baking her bread. That's what this guy was doing. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the federal government could regulate the use of that land by that farmer because of the Commerce Clause. And it reasoned that, well, if the farmer is making his own bread, then he's not buying bread that might have been in interstate commerce. I mean, if you think about the broad power that seems to have then been granted to the federal government, you're shocked, as we should be. And Chief Justice Roberts joined the majority opinion, or he wrote an opinion and the other four did, that said, Commerce Clause, you've gone way too far. There actually has to be something in interstate commerce that's being regulated. Okay, now that's a good thing. Okay, we should all be grateful that there was a majority Supreme Court justice that finally got, you know, a little lick of common sense and said, wow, we've gone way too far. We can't regulate interstate commerce based on not doing something. Okay, but the problem is that under the Taxation Clause, and this is the Taxation Clause, okay, both of these are from Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. And under that provision, Chief Justice Roberts departed from the conservative bloc and said, well, that's the power to tax, this is a tax, and the government has a great deal of power in that area. This is the way Chief Justice Roberts closed his opinion. The framers created a federal government of limited powers. Stop there. True statement, untrue statement. It's a true statement. This is a limited grant of power. Okay? And assigned to this court the duty of enforcing those limits. That's a little bit of a stretch. Okay? There's nothing in here about the courts enforcing it. But theoretically, he's correct. And actually, as North Carolinians, we should be proud of this. The very first case of judicial review came from the Supreme Court of North Carolina. It's in 1 NC 5, for those of you who want to look it up. It was in 1788, while we were voting down the federal Constitution. This is how it came up. Did you ever scratch your head as a school kid? I wondered, how did North Carolina ever pay for guns and bullets? You know, how did they pay for their army? You know, how did this come about? Well, the way they did it is if you were a British loyalist, and in this case, the fellow that actually built Tryon's Palace and some other, had a bunch of properties named Mr. Cornell, he was a British loyalist, left North Carolina. We forfeited his properties, and we sold them, and we used the money to pay guns and bullets. If you didn't take an oath of allegiance, you lost your property. Well, after the war, Cornell's daughter, who was a citizen of New York, said, wait a second, Daddy deeded that property to me. I want it back. Well, the legislature said, this is not a good thing. We don't want these British loyalists or their heirs coming to North Carolina to litigate this. So they said, we're going to make it a summary proceeding. If a person got their deed from a forfeiture sale, it's a good deed, no jury trial. Well, there's a problem. Our state constitution guarantees people a right to a jury trial. So, the court on the one hand had the constitutional guarantee of a right to a jury trial. And on the other hand, it had the statute that said no jury trial. So the question is, could the legislature violate the Constitution by taking away the right to a jury trial? The court took more than a year. Basically, keep in mind at this time, the court was appointed by the legislature, okay? And they pretty much served for life, but at the pleasure of the legislature. So they're fixing to tell the legislature, you just did something you couldn't do. That's never a good thing for judges. Always makes us a little uncomfortable, okay? But what the court said was, wow, if the legislature can take away the right to a jury trial in a civil case, it can take away the right to a jury trial in a criminal case. And that would be really bad. And if they take away the right to a jury trial, they can take away the right to vote. And if they take away the right to vote, they can make themselves legislators for life. And if they make themselves legislators for life, they can make their children or their sons legislators after them. And my goodness, why do we fight the Revolutionary War? Why don't we just call ourselves Little England? This is a bad thing. Who among the branches of government can enforce the constitutional prohibition on this? Well, the legislature is the one who enacted the law. They're not recognizing it. And the governor has such limited power, he can't do anything. I guess it falls on the court. And so the court did that, and the legislature immediately began impeachment proceedings. Cooler heads prevailed, and that was the first case, reported case, in the United States that said it's the responsibility of the court as the place of last resort. Okay, each branch of government has a responsibility. We all took the same oath. We all have the responsibility to, as best we can, be sure that what we're doing is constitutional. Okay, it's not just the court. That's not who protects, safeguards the Constitution. The legislature does. The governor does. The executive branch and the judicial branch. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to be sure that the legislature doesn't encroach upon individual rights, individual freedoms. So, Chief Justice Roberts says the framers created a federal government of limited powers. It was assigned, it should have said, but he says, and assigned to this court the duty of enforcing those limits. Then he says the court does so today. And I'd say, well, you got a half right. With regard to the Commerce Clause, yes, finally, the court has realized that the federal government does not have unlimited power. It's got to involve interstate commerce. It's got to be common sense, what folks realize it's there for in the first place. But with regard to the power to tax, my goodness, if you can tax not doing something, where in the world does that end? I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, I heard on the radio, so I know it had to be true, that not exercising is the same thing as smoking cigarettes. All right, so you guys are going to follow me here, right? We've all seen what has happened with regard to the demonization of tobacco and how it gets taxed and all these other things, right? Now, if not exercising is the same thing as smoking cigarettes, who will lead the way to help us poor, ignorant people who decide to do something other than exercise on any particular day? You know, who will get us back on the right path? Well, it must be the federal government, right? So can they now tax us, you know, for not exercising? In addition, you know, it'll be a new form that we turn in with our 1040 forms, you know, and right on the back we'll say, give us your exercise log so we know how much to tax you. I mean, think about it. And yet, that, unfortunately, seems to be the status of the law. Now, I think the good news with that, and I've heard this, I haven't checked it, but I understand that the filibuster rules of the Senate do not apply to bills with regard to taxation. So instead of needing 60 votes to try to get some vote in the Senate, now it's a majority can undo this tax. All right? But Chief Justice Roberts ends it like this. The court does not express any opinion on the wisdom of the Affordable Health Care Act. Under the Constitution, that judgment is reserved to the people. That's a true statement. You know, when it comes to the First Amendment, local communities saying, we think our county commissioners should begin the meeting as they have traditionally with prayer. We think our school board, we think at a football game, somebody wants to get up there and say a prayer, we think these are good things, all right? Why won't the Supreme Court, you know, say, under the Constitution, that judgment is reserved to the people? Before we were a nation, we had serious consideration as to how to proceed against the greatest army and navy of the world. I mean, you know, put it in perspective. It's a little bit like, you know, the little island of Grenada going to war with the United States or something. I mean, you know, it's one of those. But for a miracle, we cannot succeed. So I would submit that July the 4th, 1776 would never have occurred but for May the 17th. Well, what happened on May the 17th? Well, that's the day Congress picked out as a day of national prayer. Let me read you their words. Congress desires to have people of all ranks and degrees duly impressed with a solemn sense of God's superintending providence and of their duty devoutly to rely on His aid and direction, to earnestly recommend Friday the 17th day of May be observed by the colonies as a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that we may with united hearts confess and bewail our manifold sins and transgressions, and by sincere repentance and amendment of life, appease God's righteous displeasure, and through the merits and mediation of Jesus Christ, obtain this pardon and forgiveness. That's passed by your Congress in 1776. Don't we wish we would see an act of Congress like this again? Certainly, I know the people who drafted that had read 2 Chronicles 7:14. My people will call by my name and humble themselves and pray. Seek my face. Turn from their wicked ways. God says He'll hear our prayers, forgive our sins, and heal our land. You know, I like to hear Chief Justice Roberts say, under the Constitution, that judgment is reserved to the people. I was so impressed during his confirmation, during his confirmation hearings when he said, I believe in judicial modesty. Certainly when I ran in 2004, I said I believe in judicial self-restraint. It's not up to judges to structure the framework of this country. It's up to the government of the people, by the people, and for the people to do that. It's the legislative branch where these policy issues are debated. So why does the federal government hate us as Christians? Why do they tell us we can't practice our faith in the public square? That, to me, is a problem. And so when Chief Justice Roberts, who quite frankly I believe to be somebody who supports our view of First Amendment jurisprudence, when he says under the Constitution that judgment is reserved for the people, I think we're going to be better off if more and more judgments are reserved for the people and fewer of these things are decided in the courts. Because guess what? We always lose when it gets into the courts. Except if it's in the North Carolina court system, which is 4-3, and there's an election in November, but we're not going there. I want to close before I know you folks may have some questions, but I want to close with what the dissent said. There are 2 or 3 provisions in the dissent that make me think this at one time was the majority opinion of the court. Having written opinions that were dissents that by God's grace turned into a majority opinion, and having seen majority opinions that ceased to be majority opinions. I understand what language is used in each of those. So the 4 dissenting justices, written by Justice Kennedy, but you have Scalia, Thomas, Alito, they said this: the case is easy and straightforward. What is absolutely clear, affirmed by the text of the 1789 Constitution. Now, you know, these are bright people. They're all like Harvard, Yale, and all this, and supposedly the best of the best price. They got it wrong. It's not a 1789 Constitution. It's a 1787 Constitution. But, you know, can't get everything right. This is the 225th anniversary of the Constitution. September 17th, we ought to make a big deal out of it. You know, it's a great thing. But the U.S. Supreme Court needs to be told it's 1787 Constitution, not 1789 Constitution. Anyway, by the 10th Amendment and by innumerable cases, the principle has been, that is absolutely clear, is that there are structural limits upon federal power. Structural limits. This is a limited grant of power. The federal government can't do whatever it wants to do because bureaucrats up there think they know better than we do how to run our lives. They don't have the power under this document. It goes on to say this: the federal government has structural limits upon their power, upon what it can prescribe with respect to private conduct, and upon what it can impose upon the states. Okay? We the states. Keeping in mind the federal government can only go so far with regard to us as individuals, and it can only go so far with regard to the states. That's another good part of this decision, is that a significant majority, I think it was 7-2, said that the federal government could not, wherever the shotgun went, take the shotgun and put it to the states and say, you will reform your Medicaid to meet, you know, to have 3 or 4 times more people on the rolls than what are there now. And if you don't, we will do these terrible things to you. They can't do that. That's a good thing. That's a limitation. That's a victory for the 10th Amendment, if you will. But it goes on to say this: whatever may be the conceptual limits of the Commerce Clause, think the little guy growing wheat on his own land, he can do that now. And upon the power to tax, conceptually, I'm wondering where that is now. It says this: they cannot be such as will enable the federal government to regulate all private conduct. I say amen, absolutely. And to compel the states to function as administrators of the federal government. Now here's the sentence that shows me this was the majority opinion that didn't win. The next sentence says, that clear principle carries the day here. Oh, how we wish it had, but it didn't. Chief Justice Roberts is right in one sense. It's up to us, we the people, to protect, defend our constitutional fundamental rights. But folks, we fall asleep. 30% of evangelical Christians are not even registered to vote. Some of y'all are going to say, I've gone to Medlin. I'm sorry. Only 4% of the people of our state voted in the runoff election. You and I spent $4.5 million so that 96% of our people would stay home and do nothing. If we continue on this road of apathy, we will lose our rights. I see it in my court already. Fundamental rights that you should feel safe in your own home, that you, were you to be a victim, have more rights than the person who perpetrated that horrible crime on you. Scales of justice, right now, defendant, victim. Does the victim have any rights? Isn't your most fundamental right the right that you can feel safe in your own home, and government's most fundamental obligation is to protect you in your own home? When you walk across the parking lot, shouldn't you and your family be safe? Absolutely. That's it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Is it your fundamental right to own property, to sell it, to abuse it, or to treat it right? Yes, these are your property rights. Don't let people take away these property rights. And yet, I walked across the Capitol grounds. I do that every morning. I kind of use it a little bit as a prayer time, praying for my nation as I'm walking over. My building is on the southeast corner from the Capitol. And the Occupy Raleigh people were there. The Occupy Goldsboro movement didn't go very far. But Occupy Raleigh folks, it was sad. Walk across there, and you got this group of folks who have no idea why they're there other than somebody told them to be there. And when particularly in the evening, as I'd walk back, I would hear the little cheer, the leader or whatever would show up, and he would teach them the chants for the next day. You know, we hate rich people. We hate rich people. You know, we hate capitalism. We hate capitalism. You know, he teaches them their little chants, and they say these things. But I will say this, although, subsequently we've learned that probably they were paid, but, they were out there every day. And I'm wondering about our folks. Would we be willing to be out there every day? Now, we got jobs and all that kind of stuff, so we can, and family and church and other responsibilities. But Jesus says to render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, God what's God. Okay, you remember what happened. The Pharisees want to trip him up. They say, we're supposed to pay taxes. And Jesus said, give me a coin. Okay, whose face is on the coin? They said, well, Caesar. He said, well, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I maintain in our country, given our structure of government, it is not only our duty to pay our taxes, it's our duty to cast an informed vote. That's part of it. Y'all aren't going to like this part either. It's our duty to serve on the jury. Let me tell you about a jury. Do you know that there are only 10% of the world have jury trials? 90% of the world have judge trials. Guess where the corruption is? In the 90% of the world. It is a brilliant safeguard against governmental power. Not only judicial power, but the power of the prosecutor. It allows the citizens to make these decisions. It's brilliant. It dates back to 1215, the Fields of Runnymede. I was a small child at the time. I remember it well. But it's a great system. And I and my family and your family, you get that jury notice, it's like, oh man, do I really have to do this? Yeah. Casting an informed vote, serving on the jury, our civic responsibilities, and as God calls us, being involved with those things. You know, I always wondered, and I've heard pastors talk about this, wondered after Jesus said, well, give me the coin, whose image is on the coin? I wonder if Jesus wanted to say to the guy, now, whose image is on you? You know, render to Caesar what's Caesar's. You know, if you see the coin, whose image is on the coin? Well, you have certain responsibilities before the civil authority because of the coin. But guess what? If you go to the pool and look and you see your image, you're created in the image of God. Now render unto God what is God's. Isn't that us? Isn't that our time, our energy, our intellectual talents? We stop there and see if y'all have any questions, and then I'll defer to Ms. Hall. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, what you said is right, what Justice Roberts said is true to a certain extent, but we elect people, and as you said, they swear an oath to uphold the Constitution. We have been sold out. We've been sold out by Congress, the President, and unfortunately the Supreme Court, not by the majority, well, by the majority of them, not all of them. With that being the case, the power still resides with us on nullification. How do we expand that concept and get people aware of it so that hopefully we can take some kind of action? So let's say we end up in court over this Obama thing, we go to a jury trial, and the jury says, not guilty, end of story. Is that possible?
Well, what will happen is ultimately it'll make it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they will say, as they have in 2 other times previously, that the states do not have the right to nullify. I've got that material here, and I'll tell you what 2 times they've already said it. You know, it's one thing to say, theoretically, under the state and federal constitution, is this nullification, and, you know, let me make it clear. I agree with you, okay? But I'm going to do a reality check, okay? Here's the reality check. Under the Alien and Sedition Act, okay, it came up in the 1798. For those of you that, you know, we talk about free speech, and yet our nation has not always had free speech. And particularly in the infancy of our nation, there were very specific limitations upon free speech. And one was the Alien and Sedition Act that came up under John Adams. At one point, it looked like we were going to go to war with France. At another point, it looked like we were going to go to war with England. There were the people, Jefferson and his folks, who really loved the French, although when you look at the French Revolution, it's like, how can you embrace anything about the French Revolution? On the other hand, you had the John Adams faction that was much more believed that our better ally should have been England, and so there was anyway, the Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Act, which was used to try to silence the anti-Federalists, who at that point were now the Republican Democrats, the Jeffersonian Party. And so Kentucky passed some resolutions saying that even though the federal government passed the Alien and Sedition Act, we reject those. And that was rejected at the time by the federal government. Let's see. I think I've got a Jefferson quote here. That whensoever, this was Jefferson's view, and this is actually the view of nullification, whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Jefferson wrote that since the Constitution is a compact among the states, again, we the states versus we the people, that as in all other cases of compact among powers, having no common judge, each party, each state, should have an equal right to judge for itself, as well as the infractions, as the mode and measure of redress. So basically, Jefferson is saying we ought to be able to reject the Alien and Sedition Act. Although it never, the Alien and Sedition Acts, Kentucky backed down and they never litigated that. The second time it came up was the tariffs of 1828 and 1832. Calhoun in South Carolina said, we're not going to deal with this. Andrew Jackson said, he said, I consider the power to annul a law of the United States assumed by one state incompatible with the existence of the Union, contradicted expressly by the letter of the Constitution, unauthorized by its spirit, inconsistent with every principle of which it was founded, and destructive of the great object for which it was formed. The Constitution itself says that it is the preeminent law, and that the laws of the states cannot contradict it. But there were two. There was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, where Wisconsin didn't want to enforce that. There was a slave that made it to Wisconsin. Folks had allowed the slave to live with them. The people were charged under the Fugitive Slave Act. The state of Wisconsin, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin said, we're not going to enforce this. And the federal government stepped in and prosecuted the guy in the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Abelman versus Booth, 62 U.S. 506, 1858. That states you can't do that. Happened again in the era of desegregation with Brown versus Board of Education. Southern states didn't want to enforce it. They attempted to nullify in the case of Cooper versus Aaron, which is 358 U.S. 1, 1958. The Supreme Court said, states, you can't go out on your own. So,
Doesn't that presuppose the unlimited power and supremacy of the federal government to actually force the states to create the federal government to do whatever they want? I mean, the slave thing I can kind of understand. That's common. You're talking about property, enforcing the contracts. The Alien Sedition Act, which was a suppression of speech, there's no authority given to Congress to do that.
well,
I know what you're saying. They ruled that way.
the point, okay, and again, I agree with you, okay, but the point is that under our system, this will end up before the U.S. Supreme Court, and they will say that states can't do this. There would have to be a fundamental change in Congress, because Congress has the authority to grant or to reduce the jurisdiction of the courts. Congress has that authority under the Constitution. Okay, so it would take you've got to win control of Congress, and you have to have a will of the Congress to rein in the courts, to push the emphasis more toward the 10th Amendment and more toward we the states than we the people.
One final thing I'll show up on this. What about at the jury level? Let's say one of these things goes to trial. You go before the jury. They're trying to take your property because you didn't pay your tax, because you didn't buy health insurance, and you plead your case before the jury. They force you to do this. This is a violation of the Constitution. Find me not guilty, and they do. Then what?
Well, then they'll go prosecute somebody else and find them guilty. And,
You have to do it over and over.
yeah. I mean, certainly the jury, again, the beautiful safeguard of the jury system to protect us not only against the power of the government, but the power of the prosecutor. Traditionally, historically, it's been that way. Yes?
You confuse me.
That's not good.
I'm not sure what you said as far as the federal government can override the state. So right now, the states are trying to ignore or override the
The states have to come up with, or they can't. Okay.
The welfare, it's a new word, the welfare, what is it?
Medicaid is what you're looking
Yes,
for.
that's what I'm looking for. They're trying to override Medicaid by ignoring what the federal government has imposed on them through Obamacare. So, from what you're saying, they haven't got to let this go now.
No. And it does get confusing. That part, the U.S. Supreme Court said the federal government cannot force the states with regard to Medicaid. Okay. So, in two out of three times, the Supreme Court has limited the power of the federal government in this health care case. Commerce Clause, can't do it, gone too far. The requirement that the federal government can force the states with regard to Medicaid policy, can't do that, gone too far. So those two areas, the Supreme Court said, this is a limited grant of power, you've done too much.
Do we won't get any backlash from that, from the federal government?
Well, I mean, the federal government, the Supreme Court has basically said you can't use the kind of penalties that you're talking about. You can't force the states to do it. But the federal government will continue to take its big carrot. Money, money, money. We print it, you know. We'll give you this money, and you do what we tell you to do. And
And then I can take the carrot because they're going to say 2 years from now, it'll be our responsibility.
depends on who our governor and who our legislature is. They invariably will take the carrot. Yes. I will read, this is Article 6, okay? Article 6 is not broken down into sections, but it's a clause. It says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States shall, shall be the supreme law of the land. So that's the supreme law of the land. Well, certainly. Absolutely, absolutely. But who tells us what that is? And ultimately, it's been the Supreme Court. Any other questions? I know it's probably gone too long, but that's,
Well, I was going to ask, since they've implemented this rule, and some of the policies with Obamacare is already starting to take motion, in our economy, where do you think, or what is it going to take for us to, is there any way we could totally repeal the thing totally, or is there always going to be something that we're going to have staring us in the face?
well, I think you've gone from kind of the legal area to the policy area, but legally, yeah, they can repeal all of it.
Right, right, but see, the stuff that's already in motion.
Right. Well,
I mean-
at that point, the legislature has got to make some policy decisions.
Right.
Let's assume that, just putting it right out there, Republicans keep the House, take the U.S. Senate, and win the presidency. Okay. Then the legislature or the Congress can undo it all.
Right.
Okay. But they're going to make some policy decisions. Okay. For example, do we like the keeping kids till age 26 on their parents' insurance policy? And if so, how do we like the way that Obama implemented it, or should we do it a different way?
Right.
Should we give more health care options? Hopefully what they'll do is kick it back to the states, as it should have been,
Right.
and let each state make the determination of what's best for itself. I mean, really what's happened, and somebody asked me this the other day, why is it that hospitals, first off, and I don't know, probably 15 years ago, is, oh my goodness, we have a healthcare crisis, there are all these people out there who don't get treated. And now it's, oh my goodness, we have a healthcare crisis, all these people that we told you didn't get treated really do get treated. It's just that you pay for it through your hospital bill because they don't pay for it.
Right.
And, I had a doctor ask me, he said, what would happen if somebody showed up in an emergency room, and he said, we see it all the time, they've got a hangnail or something. Not a serious problem. And we finally said, look, with all due respect, there's an urgent care place right down the road. Go to them. Don't bring that to the hospital. That's not an emergency room thing. Because what's happening is people are using emergency rooms in hospitals as their primary care. The theory of the law is if somebody shows up, and you're at a hospital, you're a doctor, and you don't provide some aid to them, and they walk out the door and die, then you can be liable for that. If you stabilize their condition. And we actually had a case, and this is an interesting policy case, and it had to do with North Carolina Medicaid requirements. What had happened was you had an illegal from, Central America somewhere, and he had cancer. So he shows up at the hospital, And not only do they stabilize the cancer, but they cure it. Well, they charge Medicaid for the cure of his condition. And Medicaid, the state of North Carolina, said, we're not going to pay for that. The guy's here illegally. All you had to do was stabilize him and send him home. And that's what the guy should have done. But these people, we got the best judicial system in the world. We got the best healthcare system. I mean, to hear the news talk about it, woe is me, everything. We got the best. I mean, you don't see people lining up like to get into Egypt, okay? Or to, get into China. I mean, they're all wanting to get out and come to us. Why? Because by God's grace, we have, the best healthcare system. And so this guy knew, if I go home and try to wait for my socialized medicine healthcare, I'll never get it. So I'll just stay here and get the free healthcare. And it's the best in the world. Our court ruled that the state did not have to pay for his cure, that he was here illegally, and all the law required was for the hospital to stabilize him, and then he was free to go home and get his care, that all the people didn't have to pay for that. But these issues come up all the time, every day. And the longer we kick the can down the road with regard to what should our policy be with regard to enforcing our laws, with regard to borders and things like that, very important, a lot of implications there.
Right. Well, that's what I agree with. And I feel like we're just a ticking time bomb, it seems like, with some of the issues that this administration has done, So, and we're just, time is of the essence here. And it's playing havoc on our economy, small businesses and everything. So that was the only thing I was hoping that once we change administrations, hoping in November or January, that they can get in there and just throw the whole thing out, and then all the stuff that's kind of already been in motion can be disregarded, and then we can kind of have a fresh slate.
I'm going to close with 2 points. I'm out of time, but I'll be around and be glad to talk to you about other questions you might have. Okay, we talked about a lot of things that are troubling to us, and they are. People say, is there a political answer to the problems we have in America? And the answer is no. It is a spiritual problem. And the answers are spiritual. To me, such a fine example of what we need to be doing is Daniel. 3 times a day, the guy's praying for this pagan government that by God's grace he's allowed to serve. They pass a law. They say, you can't pray anymore. What does he do? Does he obey the civil authority? Right. It's a capital offense. He's going to be executed. Think about what the reason that they passed the law is because they're all jealous, because he's going to be made the #1 administrator in the kingdom. I can hear the conversation I'd be having with God. Look, God, I know I tend to go home and pray, but I'm not going to do that today because, you've allowed me to be granted favor, and in a few weeks I'm going to be the #2 guy, and then I'll straighten everything out. Then I'm just not going to be talking with you as much as I have been in the past because I don't want to be killed, so I'm not going to do that, he had every reason to rationalize and not do it. But it says when he heard about it, he immediately went home and got on his knees. It's kind of like, government, you're not going to tell me, how to pray or when to pray or when not to pray. Because you choose for yourself who you think the highest authority is. I know it's God. And I'm praying to God. I'm obeying Him. So to me, that's the great example that we have. And let me assure you that is the way our founders looked at it as well. Even in 1868, you guys have heard me say this before, the preamble to our state constitution, because I like it so much. Great theology, great, if you will. Is it religious speech? Is it political speech? Yes. The answer is yes. It says, we the people of the state of North Carolina are grateful to Almighty God, the sovereign ruler of nations, for the preservation of the American Union and the existence of our civil, political, and religious liberties, and acknowledging our dependence upon Him, upon God, for the continuation of His blessings. us and our posterity. That's it. Our dependence must be on Him. I hope and pray that our community will not only pray, but will get out and get involved. Thank you all for being